Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today, it is time to once again look at the suggestions past the developers of March 2020. We've had a look at the aviation stuff, the ground stuff, the naval stuff, and even the mechanic stuff, so now it is time to finish off with the helicopters. There isn't a lot of stuff here, but there are some interesting concepts to talk about, mainly some auto-gyro systems, which would be hilarious to see in the game, even though I have no idea how they would actually fit. So the first one is from Super Cacti, and the machine that Super Cacti is bringing up is of course the CH-47 Chinook, but it's not just the CH-47 Chinook, this is the ACH-47A, or the attack version of the Chinook. You can actually see it in this picture here. So what is this machine? So if you want to kind of break down its name, which Super Cacti does in the post, basically what you have is you have the A, which stands for attack, the C, which stands for cargo, and the H, which stands for helicopter, and the 47, which stands for 47. There's also an extra A, which stands for the first model of design, therefore the ACH-47A, which is the official designation of this machine, is the Attack Cargo Helicopter 47A model. There was 4 of these machines, which were armed and armoured, the ACH-47A Chinooks, and they were specially built for the US Army by Boeing Vertol in the late 1965, and 3 of the 4 aircraft were actually originally fielded in the Republic of Vietnam for a 6-month temporary duty test period assigned to the newly formed 53rd Aviation Detachment. Now, unfortunately, these didn't go exactly to plan, but the 3 which were deployed, they were known as Easy Money, Stump Jumper, and Birth Control, which was later known as Cost of Living. Yes, there was one of these Chinooks which was called Birth Control, which you can see here, which is kind of funny in a way. But anyway, back to the machines themselves. Unfortunately, they didn't have great fates. The Stump Jumper was lost in a taxing accident in August of 1966. Cost of Living was lost when its M24A 20mm mounting pins came loose. This caused the weapon to fire into the forward rotor blades, and the damage caused the aircraft to crash. None of the 8 crew members survived, which is horrific. Birth Control was lost to enemy fire, and the crew was rescued by Easy Money, and Easy Money was taken out of action in 1968, restored, and is currently on display at Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. So as you can see, the Attack Comanche didn't exactly have the Attack Chinook, I should say, did not have the best life. So what is it about this machine? What is the weaponry that's involved which transported this transport aircraft into an attack vehicle? Well, the first thing is it has a 40mm grenade launcher in the front of it in the XM5 armament subsystem, very similar to what you see on something like the H1G in-game, but just for a 40mm. It also had 2 20mm autocannons, which were in the fixed forward firing position, so therefore it had a 40mm being able to fire forwards, plus 2 20s, and then out of the sides it had either 5 7.62mm machine guns or 5 50 cals or 12.7mm machine guns, 2 on each side and then 1 on the back. So you can kind of see them in the picture. Basically means that, you could fire from all angles. Then on top of that as well, you could either have 2 mountings of 19 tube 2.75 inch 70mm rockets or 2 M18 7.62 GAU-2 minigun pods. So you could definitely have a lot of machine gun power if you felt like it, or you could have a lot of rocket power as well. Obviously in game this thing would be a hell of a heffalump, and it would have quite a lot of armament on it, but not really too much useful stuff. I think it would be kind of cool if we saw this as some kind of AI piece or like an event vehicle where it would come in and swoop down and you'd have to, deal with it or protect it. Anyway, it is a cool idea. The actual vehicle itself, the Chinook, is one which has been heavily used by the Americans, and I feel like it should be represented in some way in the game, and this way would be one of the ways to do it. So let's get on to the next one. This is a simple idea from Midgezel, I think is how you say that, or Zmidgezel. The simple one is about the Mi-24s, the Hind, and basically you would be able to research a modification which would be outside of the general modifications, but you'd be able to get it, and what it would mean is you could reload the guns and reload the weaponry outside of going back to the helipad. The reason for this is because the Mi-24s had the ability to carry internal stored weapons, and so therefore you could land in a safe place, you could reload, technically, your guns, and then go back and fight on the battlefield. So therefore you could increase the effective time that you spent on the battlefield instead of going back and forth from the helipad or the airstrip or wherever you would go to rearm. So therefore, why not add a modification in the game which would mean that you could have, let's say, a secondary reload, but you didn't have to go back to the airfield of your munitions, and you would obviously have increased weight, so therefore you would be a little bit slower around the place, but it would mean that you could stay in the combat area for a longer piece of time. I think generally this is a pretty cool idea, and obviously with the Mi-24 not just being limited to the Soviet tree, this would be useful for other trees as well, such as, of course, the German one. The last helicopter which is on offer is from Miki Hoshi, and it's not even a helicopter, it's an autogyro. Autogyros are not helicopters, but I suppose if we're looking at it in War Thunder, it's probably the closest thing to it. So yeah, let's have a chat about this ridiculous machine. So when it comes to the Kayaba 02, it actually went through a bunch of different iterations before it actually went into service. Yes, this thing did enter service in World War II. Yes, it was used by the Japanese. The Kayaba Ka-2 originally was not created for an active combat role. Not a surprise. And it was kind of pushed into a combat role at the end of World War II because of the horrible position the Japanese found themselves in. But at the start, in August 1939, the Japanese Imperial Army decided that they wanted a new autogyro from the US. This was the Kelet KD-1A, and the Imperial Japanese Army viewed the autogyro as an ideal replacement to their observation balloons, which they'd used previously. They intended to use them for an artillery observation role in China, and the KD-1A was actually badly damaged in February of 1940 after being shipped over there, and Kayaba at the time was requested to repair it. So they repaired the KD-1A, and that became the first prototype of what was known as the Ka-1. It flew its first flight on the 26th of May 1941, and the first prototype was powered by a Jacobs L4MA7 7-cylinder radial engine producing 245 horsepower. The following two prototypes were powered by a slightly weaker 240 horsepower V8 engine, and this, along with the initial batch of autogyros known as the Ka-1 or the O1, and in 1943 it was planned to produce about 60 of these machines, and by 1944 the production rate would be about 20 autogyros a month, which is kind of crazy. The production, though, it slowed due to the delays of the engine and also the rotor delivery, which isn't too much of a surprise, and it was then decided to switch production over to a licensed copy of the Jacobs L4MA7 radial engine. The variant was then designated the Ka-2, and by now the war had turned against the Empire of Japan, obviously in 1944, and its original role of observation wasn't really required anymore, so it was decided to press the autogyro into an anti-submarine service role, and to make this happen, a single shackle point was installed capable of carrying up to 60 kilos of ordnance. Watch out, a 60-kilo bomb is coming, and the carriage of weapons required that only the pilot in the rear seat flew, as if you had the weight of the observer as well as the weapons, it would overburden the engine and the machine would not be able to move. So in 1943, trials began for use as an ASW aircraft, and they also tried to operate it off a modified deck of the 2D Japanese transport ship. These were deemed to be too cramped, for the autogyro operations, and the same year they did trials off the Army aircraft carrier, the Akitsu Maru, and these were seen as satisfactory. But the Akitsu Maru would never actually carry any of the KA-1s or the KA-2s in an operational form, because they still had the Ki-76, and this was considered superior for the ASW role, and its lower speed negated the only advantage the autogyro had as well at the time. So in 1944, the Ka-2 was redesignated the O2 to avoid confusion with an operation. This was the Operation Ka, and it was a planned operation to retake the Solomon Islands by the Japanese, and in 1944 also marked the completion of training of the first 50 autogyro pilots in the Imperial Japanese Army, and some of the Kayaba autogyros were loaded onto the Akitsu Maru, and they were supposed to be transported to the Philippines, but unfortunately it never made it. It was sunk by a US submarine while en route, and beginning in January 1945, ASW operations began on mainland Japan out of the Iki Island, I think is how you say that, or Iki Island, and Izuhara Airfield. But the USN Aviation appeared more commonly over the Tsushima Strait. The autogyros were relocated to the Nao base until the war ended. There was about 30 O2s operational at the time by the Imperial Japanese Army, and another 20 to 30 were waiting their engines until when the war ended, and around a dozen complete O2s were lost in bombing raids. There was about 75 O2s built in varying degrees. So these were used, they were machines which definitely were definitely around the place at the time, and obviously not helicopters, they were autogyros, but still would be kind of funny to see in some kind of event format. If you want to know the armament of this machine, you could either carry one 60-kilo bomb or one 50-kilo depth charge. So yeah, have a bit of fun with that. Obviously, it would never be, competitive or anything, but it would be kind of a cool vehicle. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. I just want to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Martinez, Super Cacti, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, and also Elove Goat and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.